Unbecoming immediately brings to mind what's appropriate for feminine behavior in a polite society. But it also brings to mind, for me, a state of transition of some kind, right? So some kind of movement, something that is being something else. That, to me, kind of points back to materiality and how things are made. It feels a little bit like something that's not quite in a perfect rest. Something that's a little bit wobbly or imperfect or kind of leaning, maybe fragile or something. I feel like I'm in a big life transition where I can reflect or just sit quietly and maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll do nothing. There are a lot of male artists that just in the middle of their career just decide, you know, I'm not gonna be an artist anymore. And everyone's like, isn't that cute? And then like they start making, I'm gonna just start saying that. Yeah, I'm just gonna start saying that. Like, I'm not doing anything. I got in my studio, layoff. Like, we'll see what comes. I love stories. I love storytelling. I love trying to understand why certain stories persist. The story of the Hans Memling allegory of chastity painting is super bizarre. It's an allegory of chastity. It's a woman wearing a mountain, kind of like a chastity belt. She's sitting rather politely, you know, hands folded, but you know, of course, plugging a mountain, a volcanic eruption probably within her. So I fixated on her as a character for a long time and actually paired her with another fictional character, the story of Gradiva, which is essentially a story of a figment of the imagination of an archaeologist who becomes obsessed with a sculpture of a woman walking mid-step or walking through the walls. And he starts to hallucinate her, and he sees her on the streets of Rome and then follows her all the way to Pompeii. And she's a character that's very much the opposite of the woman in the mountain. She's very free floating and very transient and hard to catch. Kanya Makan is the Arabic saying for there was and there was not, which is essentially saying once upon a time. It's a reinterpreted scene of the story of Shahrazad as she tells the stories of the 1001 Arabian Nights to the king, as well as her sister, who is also in the room as an audience. I've loved the story of Shahrazad since I was very young. Large part because it's a female narrator that has such a wild imagination. She's essentially able to save all womankind because she prevents the king from slaughtering another bride each night by leaving his bedtime stories on a cliffhanger. So I kind of reimagined a scene where she was telling the stories to her sister and what that would look like. And so I positioned myself in a room and kind of Photoshop, collaged it together so that I'm kind of narrating a story as Shahrazad, as the speaker and as the listener, as the sister as well. That was the image base that I was working with when I was making these paper pulp works. I love working with paper pulp as an image building material. You know, there's this very incredibly delicate, incredibly thin, almost invisible material that was built by this whisper of a layer after another, very thin layers that would be built up over hours. And then you kind of have this almost cast image. It's not pigment on canvas. It is the canvas. I choose materials for any number of reasons. So it might be narrative, it might be historical, it might be something I just want to play with my hands. I do love working with these kind of, quote, foundational sculpture materials in a way, which is like metal, plaster. But you know, when I say metal, I mean like a whole range of ways of working with metal. So it's bronze, it's welding, it's even gold leaf. And I love to work with gypsum or plasters, and I find plaster in all its variants just like incredible. You know, it's as old as dirt, and literally, you know, you mix a powder and a liquid together, and then this thing becomes a solid and remains there until it's worn away. Also, a lot of new materials that might remain kind of hidden or hard to see that I think makes my work look more, of this moment, because I use a lot of fiberglass, I use a lot of foam and things that didn't exist back in, Renaissance times. So yeah, I like to use a breadth of materials that have been around for centuries and materials that are honestly just being discovered now. And I like to kind of figure out new ways to make things by combining both those old and new materials and processes so that something else emerges.